Hello, I'm Tianyuan. Today I'm going to give an overview of three issues closely related to schooling: social class and inequality, cultural difference and identity, and gender. These issues are also particularly relevant to my own teaching practices. How to cater the needs of students with lower socioeconomic backgrounds, how to make children of immigrants from non-English-speaking countries feel motivated in Australian schools. How should educators understand the gender differences of students? These are some of the most common and widely discussed issues in Australian schools, and to answer them relies on understanding of related education theories and literature. Australia is often described as a meritocratic society. Meritocracy is a political philosophy. It holds that social resources and power should be allocated among individuals only according to the talent and the performance, not according to the class position or family background. However, we live in a stratified society. People are classified into different classes according to their social position. A social class is a social group sharing similar socio-economic background. In Marxist social theory, it is the individual's relationship to labor power and capital that determines which class he or she belongs to. Working class people own labor power, but not means of production. It is a capitalist class that controls the whole production process and own the majority of the wealth and resources. According to the Max Weber, there are four social classes: working, lower middle, and upper classes. People have different access to life chances. That is, the opportunities one has to achieve economic prosperity. Life chances are often associated with social status, wealth, and political power. For example, many quality boarding schools have higher tuition fees. The children of a successful businessman have larger chance of attending such schools than children with a similar level of intelligence from lower socio-economic backgrounds. The reasons that children with similar talents have very different access to their life chances is wealth. However, these elements are relatively contingent. So, one's class position is also subject to change. What does schooling have to do with social class? First, educational resources are not evenly distributed among different social classes. James 2000 reported that Australians with lower socioeconomic backgrounds have roughly half the likelihood of participating in higher education as Australians from medium and higher socioeconomic backgrounds. On the other hand, young people show strong inclination to receive tertiary education. According to a national survey, over 7,000 year 10 to 12 students reported in James 2000. About 90% of the sample reported that they would prefer to undertake a tertiary education after school. From these figures, it is reasonable to conclude that students' class position are highly correlated to their chances of getting higher education. Second, Bernstein argues that educators' expectations for students reflect social norms that are associated with class-based social stratification. The education system in a society is often used by ruling class to circulate certain ideologies. That is, controlling beliefs for maintaining their power. The criteria for good students and for good learning often reflect the thoughts of the middle and the upper class. Education is also influencing social mobility. By getting educated, one can gain the opportunity of moving upwards through the class ladder. People's social status, power, and wealth are often influenced by the education they receive. A school not only equips students with knowledge and skills, but also provides them with opportunities to establish their own network. That is, students can establish both cultural and social capital through education. Cultural capital refers to knowledge, skills, disposition, and social taste that can provide access to social power. Social capital are social resources available to an individual which can provide access to power. Now, we turn to the second issue, cultural difference and identity. Australia is a culturally diverse country. Many Australians were born overseas or have parents born overseas. Over 200 languages are spoken in Australia. For many reasons, Australia can well be seen as multicultural. On the other hand, education is one of the most powerful ways of inducting young people into a given culture. Can Australian schools reflect the cultural diversity we have? Take language as an example. The study of a second language is not compulsory in Australia. Although Australia has a rich store of languages, second language education in Australia is limited. For example, the number of Year 12 students studying Indonesian fell almost 40% from 2005 to 2009. Similar decline can be observed in Japanese, Chinese, and Korean. This fact indicates that we haven't paid enough effort into knowing the cultures of our Asian neighbors and immigrant countries. As language is one of the most important barriers of culture, the reason for the decline of second language education can largely reflect the problems we have in our education system for intercultural communication. There are 4 reasons. The first is lack of motivation. As English is widely spoken across the world, many native English speakers don't have the motivation of studying a second language. Many of them even have the delusion that everyone speaks English. The second is our declining potency in trade. Thirdly, the scaling practices for territory entry makes it more difficult for those who take second language subjects to get higher scores. The fourth reason is the lack of the compulsory curriculum. How should we treat cultures that are different from the mainstream Anglo culture? The cultures of Indonesia peoples and immigrants. Historically, the Australian national policies can be summarized into 2 categories: assimilation and multiculturalism. Assimilation is the belief that everyone who comes into Australia should abandon their own culture to fit into the Anglo-cultural norms. Multiculturalism is the belief that every culture deserves equal respect. A multicultural education system in Australia should reflect the valuable cultural diversity we have. A common principle is that cultural diversity is both dynamic and enriching, and something from which all should benefit. In terms of language education, our education system should provide support from linguistic diversity. Community language programs and authentic community festivals should also gain support from education departments. The last issue we discuss is gender. One breakthrough of the later 20th century Western feminism is the distinction between sex and gender. Sex is a biological fact, while gender is psychological and social. One's sex is determined by one's physical conditions and can be scientifically defined. One's gender, on the other hand, is a collection of lived experiences in a particular social context. This may contrast to the traditional understanding of gender as the outer expression of some inner essence. Queer theory further challenges the association between the female sex and the expectation for the female. Gender refers not to something we are, but to something we do. In other words, a female doesn't need to behave like a female. Being a female doesn't necessarily mean that one has to devote one's life to domestic works. She has every right to enter the job market and pursue any career path. A female can choose to perform or not to perform the role of the woman. Schools, as an important social institution, also has its own gender regime. Here, gender regime refers to the pattern of gender relations that is characteristics of a given organization. The gender regime of Australian schooling can be summarized in the following aspects. First, the division of labor. 43% of the secondary teachers are men, but they hold over 68% of the principal positions. Second, the power relations, that is, how males and females exercise power. For example, male leadership styles are thought to be tough and directive, while female leaders are thought of conciliatory and supportive. Third, the emotional relationships. For example, in secondary schools, male teachers often seek to maintain their gender dominance in departments such as IT. Fourth, the organizational culture. For example, it is often thought that male students are better than girls in rational thought subjects such as math, physics, and computer science. A prominent gender issue in Australian schools is that, although more teachers in schools are female, women are seriously underrepresented at the leadership level. Another widely discussed issue concerning gender in education is the gender gap in educational outcomes. Do boys and girls perform differently in school? Are boys better at math? Girls better at literacy? Clear and reliable answers to these questions are important, since negative stereotypes and expectations are often harmful for students' performance, according to a research by Spencer, Steele, and Quinn, 1999. Based on long-term studies of many international survey data. Hyde, 2005, proposed a gender similarity hypothesis, stating that males and females are similar on most, but not all, psychological variables, that is, men and women, as well as boys and girls, are more alike than they are different. In particular, a research by Hyde in 2008 shows that gender similarity characterizes students' performance in math. Okay, I have finished my review of these issues. Thank you for your attention.